Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's Constitution Week Keynote Address. Would you please rise for colors?
Present. Arms. Order. Arms. Left. Face. Forward. March. Left. 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 Right. Left. 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 Right. Left. 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 Right.
Thank you. Please be seated. My name is Rick Griffin, and on behalf of the administration, faculty, staff, and students of Utah Valley University, we would like to welcome you to our keynote address. On this date, in 1787, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention put pen to paper and signed that historic document. On his way home from the convention, Benjamin Franklin was stopped by a woman who asked, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" The sage of Philadelphia is reported to have said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." We meet here today with Benjamin Franklin's words ringing in our ears as we prepare to celebrate the drafting of the Constitution and also to celebrate our citizenship and to learn more about the important role the Constitution plays in our republic. We are thrilled to have Senator Orrin Hatch with us today as our keynote speaker. But before we get to his introduction, we would first like to have a few words by Matthew Holland, President of Utah Valley University. President Holland.
Thank you. I asked Professor Griffin if I could have just a couple of minutes. You're all here to hear from Senator Hatch, as it should be, but this is a special day for me. September 17th is the day my brother was born. It's the day my oldest son was born, and it's the birth date of the Constitution. There are a few more important things than those things in my life, but not many. Those are two people near and dear to my life, and a document that has certainly made all the difference in the community that I have grown up in, you have grown up in, and that has governed this nation for more than a couple of centuries. It is our most important export. Before the United States of America formed under a written constitution, such things did not happen in the world. And now they happen everywhere with the U.S. Constitution as a model. It's appropriate that we venerate it, that we honor it, that we understand it, and that we ceaselessly strive to live by it, changing it as we need to through proper constitutional means, but always seeking the benefits of the order that can come with our freedoms if we are a Constitution-abiding people. It's with that appreciation for this day and for our good friend, Senator Orrin Hatch, who, as you can appreciate as a sitting United States Senator, has an extraordinarily busy schedule, but has now been here on our campus twice in under 2 weeks' time to share with us his insights and his thoughts about these critical issues that are facing our country and may be more confrontational, maybe more important, maybe more at stake than they have been in recent times. It's with that that I invite Professor Griffin back up to introduce our honored guest. But I wanted a moment to personally welcome him and to say to you how much this day means to me. Thank you very much.
At an earlier meeting, I said, I now know what it's like to have lightning strike twice in the same place, because we have Senator Hatch back-to-back on campus. A big part of getting Senator Hatch back on campus was done by Dr. Elaine Engelhardt. And so we've asked her, we've given her the honor to introduce Senator Hatch. Dr. Engelhardt.
It is a very big honor to introduce my dear friend Orrin Hatch, but before I introduce him, I'd like to acknowledge the members of the Constitution Committee, Dr. Rick Griffith. And Rick, do you want to stand and have your whole committee stand and take a round of applause? His committee has worked tirelessly to pull together a week's of events, and I'm grateful that I could be part of this, and especially that I could introduce to you the Honorable Senator Orrin G. Hatch. I remember, in fact, in 1976, when Orrin Hatch ignored a mountain of controversial wisdom when he decided to run against Senator Frank Moss, who was a powerful Democrat at the time when Utah was a very blue state. Well, the novice Republican underdog campaigned across Utah, and eventually he defeated Moss to represent Utah in the United States Senate. From 1981 to 1987, Senator Hatch served as chairman of the Labor and Human Resources Committee, now called the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. During that time, he helped create the modern industries of generic drugs and nutritional supplements. Senator Hatch is currently the second-ranking Republican on the Senate Committee on Finance, where he has been a leading advocate for policies to encourage savings and investment. He is perhaps best known, however, for his chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee, a position in which he has served from 1995 to 2001 and again from 2003 to 2005. Still, the senior Republican on that committee, the Judiciary, he has participated in the confirmation hearings of 8 of 9 current Supreme Court justices and numerous federal judges. And currently, he's going through a censorship and impeachment hearing with a federal judge. Senator Hatch is the 5th most senior member of the U.S. Senate and most senior Republican. He has truly had a unique opportunity to see how the Constitution has been applied in the highest offices of our government. It is our pleasure to present to you the most wonderful Constitution Week speaker, Senator Orrin Hatch.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you at this great university. This is a great school, and it means a great deal to me. I was only in the Senate a few weeks when my side came to me, a couple of months really, and came to me and said, you have to lead the fight on the floor against this increase in appropriations. It was a situation back in 1977 where the Democrats were going to increase spending from a $100 million program to $220 million program. Doesn't sound like much today, but it was a lot then. And so I went on the floor. I had 4 amendments that our side wanted us to get. And we were on the floor, myself and only 2 other senators, Senator Jack Javits of New York, who represented the Republican side, but was one of the all-time most liberal senators, and Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin. They were both together opposed to what I was trying to do. And then, of course, we'd have people sitting in the chair, but they would come and go. So the three of us were there from 9 in the morning till 9 at night and arguing over these 4 amendments. And during that period of time, that 12-hour period, we were able to get them to agree to 3 of them. But the 4th one was that I wanted to save $20 million, which is the most I could save under the rules, under the circumstances, for the taxpayers. And finally, I waited till just the right point of frustration, and I walked over to these 2 august senior senators. I said, oh, come on, fellas. Let me save the taxpayers $20 million, and we can all go home. And Javits shook his finger. By the way, the galleries were full. He shook his finger in my nose. He said, Senator Hatch, we're not giving back 1 dime if you filibuster all night long. And the gallery leaned over because they wanted to hear what he had to say, and he was shaking his finger at me, and Nelson was doing the same. I said, well then, fellas, I said, I guess I'm going to have to pull my trump card on you. And they got a big grin on their faces because they knew I didn't have more than 20, 25 votes. And Senator Javits said, well, now, Senator Hatch, what might that trump card be? I said, I'll tell you what it'll be. If you don't immediately capitulate and let me save the taxpayers $20 million, I'm going to send the Mormon missionaries to both of you. And they went, oh, no. Both hands went up like that. The gallery leaned over. They were sure he was going to hit me. And well, I want you to know that they immediately capitulated, and we saved you $20 million. So Mormon missionaries play a noble role in so many ways, you know. I want to thank you, President Holland, for the warm welcome and introduction you've given me today. Professor Eaglehart, I think the world of her. She's been my friend for so many years. Elaine is a wonderful, wonderful person, and I'm very, very happy with her new husband, who's a great philosopher from what I can see. That's great. And then Professor Griffin, you're terrific. You've always been so kind to me. Now, today is Constitution Day. This is the anniversary of the day of 1787 when delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia signed the draft charter so that it could be considered for ratification by the states. The Constitution is one of 4 organic laws of the United States and declares itself to be the supreme law of the land. Federal and state officials in all 3 branches of government must swear to preserve, protect, and defend or otherwise support the Constitution. That's how important it is. On this Constitution Day, I would like to explore with you whether the Constitution, now in its 3rd century of life, is still relevant today. I believe that once we clarify what the Constitution really is and what it does, the answer is that it must be relevant because liberty itself depends on this Constitution. Polls show that more than 3/4 of Americans say that the Constitution is important to them, and 90% of them say that the Constitution is relevant to modern life. That may be encouraging as far as it goes, but unfortunately it does not go very far. 50% or more of Americans can name the 50% more Americans can name the 3 stooges than the 3 branches of government. I know that is not going to be a problem here at this great university. 4 times as many Americans say that a detailed knowledge of the Constitution is absolutely necessary. They say that they actually have such knowledge. More than 1/4 of our fellow citizens believe that the text of the Constitution protects a right to abortion. More than 1/5 believe that the First Amendment protects the right to own a pet. And perhaps most frightening, 20% of Americans believe that only lawyers can understand the Constitution. That is frightening when you think about it. Commentator James Bovard calls this state of affairs, which has been getting worse for more than 4 decades, attention deficit democracy. I think that's a great term. This is a very serious situation because, as James Madison put it, quote, a well-instructed people alone can be a permanently free people, unquote. Now, the fact that our system of government has produced the greatest degree of sustained, ordered liberty in the world history is not an accident, and liberty will not simply sustain itself. Self-government takes work and requires accurately informed and actively engaged citizens just to survive let alone to thrive. Now go with me for a few minutes back to the birth of the Republic. In 1776, the Second Continental Congress appointed committees to prepare both a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution for the new nation. It took 5 years for that Congress to debate and the states to ratify the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Just 6 years later, 12 of the 13 states sent delegates to Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. They conducted their meetings in secret, posting guards at the door of the Pennsylvania State House where they met. I can only imagine what would have happened if the internet site WikiLeaks had existed back then, with drafts of proposals and committee notes flying all over the place. As it was, even working in secret, the effort almost failed. The so-called Great Compromise passed by only a single vote, and that was where we have equal rights of suffrage in the Senate. That compromise literally saved the Constitution and perhaps the Union itself. George Washington wrote later that the Constitution was little short of a miracle. Congress debated the draft Constitution for only 3 days before sending it on to the states. And the necessary 9 states ratified it in less than a year. While the Articles of Confederation lasted a little longer than it took to debate and ratify it, the Constitution has become the oldest written charter of government and freedom in world history. America has, of course, changed a great deal since then. The median age at the dawn of the 19th century was 16, the median age of people, and 95% of citizens lived off the land at that time. The national government spent $4.3 million during the first session of Congress, or slightly more than $1 for each person in America at the time. Today, the median age is 37, and only 20% of Americans live today in rural areas. The President's budget for 2010 fiscal year is $3.65 trillion, or slightly more than $10,000 for every citizen or every person living in America. Now, whether the Constitution is relevant today must be measured not by what has changed in America, but what must never change. That is why it is so vitally important for all Americans to understand just what the Constitution really is. These days, it seems fashionable to treat the Constitution as if it were something like the J. Crew catalog, reflecting only the shifting and morphing tastes and fads of the moment. If that is all the Constitution is, then our liberty is no more secure than the Supreme Court's latest mood swing. Understanding the true relevance of the Constitution comes only after understanding the true nature of the Constitution. And that can come only by, as Madison said, referring to principles. The Declaration of Independence lays the foundation of these principles, or what it calls self-evident truths. These include that government derives its powers from the consent of the governed, that government exists to secure unalienable rights, and that the people have power to alter or to abolish the government. Benjamin Franklin was the only person to have signed all 4 documents associated with America's founding, and constantly urged the Constitutional Convention delegates to consult rather than contend. At 81, he needed help to sign the Constitution, and did so with tears streaming down his face. The 20,000 mourners at Benjamin Franklin's funeral in April 1790 constituted the largest public gathering up to that time. When he left the final meeting of the Constitutional Convention on September 17, 1787, as Professor Griffith has said, when he was asked what form of government would be established, he responded that the new government would be a republic, if you can keep it. And in fact, the Constitution guarantees a republican form of government. Madison defined a republic as a system in which government derives all its powers, directly or indirectly, from the people. James Wilson, who really had a lot to do with writing the Constitution, served in Congress, signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and was one of President George Washington's original appointees to the newly created Supreme Court of the United States of America. In his famous lectures on law, Wilson described our system of government by saying that, quote, "Here the people are masters of the government," unquote. Echoing the Declaration of Independence, the Utah Constitution declares that the people of this state ordained and established the charter to secure and perpetuate what it calls the principles of free government. Article 1, Section 2 states some of these principles, quote, "All political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority, and they have the right to alter or reform their government as the public welfare may require," unquote. Now, President Washington expressed this sovereignty of the people more specifically in his farewell address, which was published on September 19, 1796, in a Philadelphia newspaper, the Daily American Advertiser. He said this, quote, "The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution, which at any time exists until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all," unquote. There you have it. This republic, government derives its powers from the people who have the right to establish and change both their government and the Constitution. What then is the Constitution? It is the primary mechanism by which people continue to be masters of the government, the people continue to be masters of the government, and therefore to remain free. Neither the basis of our political system nor the principles of free government have changed. Therefore, liberty itself depends upon the people remaining the masters of government and the people retaining the authority to control the Constitution. Chief Justice John Marshall wrote in Marbury versus Madison, probably the most famous Supreme Court case of all, that the Constitution is intended to govern judges as much as legislators. Let me mention an example of how the principles I have discussed play out in each of these two areas. Alexander Hamilton described the judiciary as the weakest and least dangerous branch of government. The limited role for federal judges, no doubt, made more acceptable the fact that they have unlimited terms of office. They're appointed for life. In fact, their tenure is probably the oldest thing to eternal life that exists on this planet. I am told that Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, as he neared the end of his 30 years on the Supreme Court, was walking one day with a fellow jurist when they passed a young, strikingly beautiful blonde woman. Justice Holmes sighed, shook his head, and said, "Ah, if I were only 70 once again." The conflict over judicial appointments is really a conflict over two fundamentally different models of judicial power. In one model, which is often called judicial restraint, judges submit to the Constitution. Restrained judges read the words of the Constitution and look to the same authority that provided them, namely to the people for the meaning of those words. In the other model, which is often called judicial activism, judges control the Constitution. Activist judges read the words of the Constitution, but look wherever they wish for the meaning they want to give those words. The debate here is not about what the meaning of the Constitution is or what we might want that meaning to be. The debate is about whose meaning counts. The power to alter the Constitution, which Washington said is the very basis of our political system, is not limited to choosing the Constitution's words. The real essence of the Constitution, after all, is not the mere form of its words, but the substance of their meaning. Whoever controls the meaning of the Constitution controls the Constitution. If the people are to remain masters of the government, then the people, and not the government, must control the meaning of the Constitution. You may not even have noticed, but I have not mentioned any hot-button political issues or referred to judges as liberal or conservative, or justices as liberal or conservative. These labels, or those labels, are useful only in politics, which is about results, about winners, and about losers. Judging, however, is about the process of reaching results. This is why both judicial restraint and judicial activism can produce results that might be labeled liberal or conservative. In 1973, for instance, the Supreme Court said in Roe versus Wade that the 14th Amendment's due process clause protects a right to abortion, abortion on demand. Conservatives condemned the decision, saying that all you have to do is read the Constitution to see that there is no such right mentioned in the Constitution. But in 2000, the Supreme Court said in the Troxel v. Granville case that the same due process clause protects a right of parents to rear their children. Conservatives cheered the decision, even though all you have to do is read the Constitution to see that there's no such express right. In both cases, the Supreme Court created a so-called constitutional right that the people had not actually put into the Constitution. The fact that one is liberal and the other is conservative is a political distinction without a constitutional difference. If a principle applies only to others, it just might be nothing but politics. Activist judges change the meaning of the words that are actually in the Constitution, and they invent provisions that the people never put there at all. One of my predecessors from Utah, the senator from Utah, George Sutherland, served on the Supreme Court for 16 years. And he was from Provo, by the way. He called judicial activism, quote, amendment in the guise of interpretation, unquote. Justice Hugo Black criticized what he called the Supreme Court's, quote, day-to-day constitutional convention, unquote. I thought it was an interesting way of putting it. And Justice Antonin Scalia, a great friend of mine, whose nomination the Senate confirmed 24 years ago today, called it simply power judging. He did that in derision, of course. That is why I've said for many years that qualifications or qualification for judicial service include a proper judicial philosophy or the proper understanding of the power and role of judges in the system of government. An individual who believes that judges may change the meaning of the Constitution, that is, that judges may take the power to alter the Constitution away from the people, is frankly not qualified to sit on the federal Supreme Court bench. A lawyer died and he went to heaven, and on a particular busy day, waiting in line to enter the pearly gates, this lawyer spotted a man in a black robe walk to the front of the line, speak briefly to St. Peter, and go right in. When it was his turn, the lawyer made sure to say how grateful he was to be able to spend eternity in heaven, especially so since so few of his colleagues were likely to be there. But he asked why the judge he had seen earlier got preferential treatment. St. Peter said, oh, that was actually God. He just thinks he's a federal judge sometimes. That gives you some idea of how we understand our federal judiciary. If the Constitution cannot mean whatever judges want it to mean, it cannot mean whatever legislators want it to mean. Utah and 19 other states, as well as the National Federation of Independent Business, have sued the federal government just now over the constitutionality of the new health care law, ridiculously called Obamacare. Maybe not so ridiculously. We are challenging both the mandate and the individuals by health insurance and the mandates on states on business. In other words, we're challenging the individual mandate and also the employer mandate. Now, just 3 days ago, U.S. District Judge Roger Vinson in Pensacola, Florida, heard arguments about the government's motion to dismiss the case. I am encouraged by reports from those who attended that the judge appears to recognize the substance of the issue, or issues, I should say, and seems inclined to at least hear the arguments on the merits. He noted during the argument that the federal government has never before required individuals to purchase a particular good or service. You see, Article 1, Section 8, the Commerce Clause, basically allows the federal government control over matters in activities in interstate commerce. These are not activities. If the government can tell you what you have to buy, then there's no liberty left, and there are no freedoms left. These are really important cases, even though many constitutional scholars believe that those bringing them, the 20-some states, are not going to win. I'm not so sure about that. There are other unconstitutional aspects in Obamacare. Just as in the debate over judicial philosophy, this lawsuit is about whether the people or the government control the Constitution. The Constitution, for example, gives Congress the power to regulate commerce among the several states. Commerce is activity. That's the way it's referred to by all prior Supreme Court decisions in which individuals choose to engage. Even when the Supreme Court expanded the Commerce Clause in the 1930s, it still said that Congress may regulate activities that substantially affect commerce. The mandate that individuals use their own money to purchase government-approved health insurance is another thing altogether. Congress is now in the business of regulating not activities, but personal decisions. To paraphrase the opening of the old Star Trek episodes, this would boldly go where the government has never gone before. Now, the Constitution may say what the people said, but unless it still means what the people meant, the people will have lost control over the Constitution. The casualty would be nothing less than liberty itself. What I've discussed today should make clear that constitutional amendments by judges are always illegitimate, even if they are good ideas. Similarly, constitutional amendments by the people are always legitimate, even when they are bad ideas, because they will have gone through the constitutional process. And that is the point. Those who have the authority to amend the Constitution are the ones who should debate whether to do so. There have been upwards of 10,000 proposed constitutional amendments in American history, and only 27 have made it through. In recent years, amendments have been proposed to prohibit incarceration for traffic offenses and to prohibit the early release of criminals who are incarcerated. Amendments have been proposed to require reconfirmation of federal judges after 12 years, after 10 years, and even after only 6 years. Now, I do not know if we could endure doubling or tripling the number of judicial confirmation hearings, having been through the ones I've been through. Frankly, if we appointed the right kind of judges in the first place, their tenure would not even be an issue. I believe that a constitutional amendment is appropriate only when you follow the process of the Constitution. I believe that a constitutional amendment is inappropriate when a statute will do it. In other words, a constitutional amendment must be the only means of achieving a nationally important goal. These criteria are the reason why the amendments I have proposed have, on average, 3 times as many co-sponsors as proposed amendments overall. Now, 2 categories of amendments fit my criteria. The first is when the Supreme Court has simply itself misinterpreted the Constitution. Remember that the Constitution belongs to the people, not to the judges. The Supreme Court, for example, has held that the First Amendment prohibits either state or federal legislation to protect the American flag from acts of physical desecration. The last time I introduced an amendment to change this gross misinterpretation of the Constitution was in 2005, and the Senate came within a single vote of the 2/3 necessary to approve it. It was a hotly debated issue on the floor. We had to have 67 votes. It had passed, swooped through the House. I took the floor, and the reason I wanted to do this wasn't just to protect our American flag, our national symbol, from acts of physical desecration. And you can imagine what those acts were. It was to create a debate in the public mind all over this country, because had we passed it through the Senate, had we gotten the requisite 67 votes, we would have created the biggest constitutional debate in history in all 50 states concerning just what the Constitution means. And we lost that by 1 solitary vote in the Senate. The other category of amendments that I've supported involves changing the very structure of government itself. I would put in this category the requirement of a balanced federal budget. I introduced a balanced budget amendment in 1997 with the same result, coming within a single vote of the Senate approving this critical government reform. Now, these are examples of the people asserting their authority over the Constitution. In one of its earliest decisions in 1795, the Supreme Court asked the same question that I've asked here today. What is the Constitution? The court's answer was this, quote, "It is the form of government delineated by the mighty hand of the people in which certain first principles of fundamental law are established. The Constitution is fixed and certain. It contains the permanent will of the people and is the supreme law of the land, and can be revoked or altered only by the authority that made it," unquote, meaning the people. Now, isn't that wonderful, rich language? Today, the very mention of such things as first principles or fundamental law makes many people roll their eyes and reach for their television remotes. The notion that anything, let alone the Constitution, is fixed and certain these days is dismissed with the intellectual wave of the hand. I would ask those who believe in such a Constitution, one that changes with the seasons or the latest blog posting, whether they are truly confident that such a document with words that do not mean anything is really enough to keep us free. Justice Benjamin Curtis dissented in the infamous case of Dred Scott versus Sanford. He wrote that if, quote, "the theoretical opinions of individuals are allowed to control the Constitution's meaning, we have no longer a Constitution. We are under the government of individual men who, for the first time, having power to declare what the Constitution is, according to their own views of what it ought to mean," unquote. He was the dissenting vote in the Dred Scott decision, which has been vilified ever since, as it should have been. Justice Sutherland would later write that this would transform enduring mandates into mere moral reflections. Now, I'm here to say that I still believe what America's founders believed, that liberty requires limits on government, and that those limits come from a Constitution that the people themselves have established, and that the people alone may control. It comes from a Constitution with words and with meaning that do not change unless the people themselves change them. I agree with Thomas Jefferson that our written Constitution can be what he called a peculiar security for liberty only if it is not made a blank paper by construction. A Constitution written in disappearing ink or with meaning found only in the eye of the beholder cannot protect our liberties. When I take the oath of office, I swear to support and defend not some Constitution or my Constitution, but the Constitution. So on this Constitution Day, let us discover again what the Constitution really is. It is a charter by which people assert control over government, the foundation on which the first principles of government and liberty are built. That Constitution must be relevant today because we cannot be free without it. Like in the biblical story, if the house of liberty is built on the rock of enduring mandates and the permanent will of the people, it will withstand the tempests and storms of our times. But if it is built on the sand of theoretical opinions and mere moral reflections, no more than a few waves of change will bring it down. You may well remember the commercial for cornflakes cereal, which urged people to try them again for the first time. I hope we rediscover the principles of government and recommit ourselves to the fundamentals of freedom. They've been there all along. But as President Andrew Jackson said, our eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We must pay that price if we are to secure this blessing. God bless all of you, and thank you for letting me be with you here today.
Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you, Senator Hatch. We have certainly appreciated your address. Everyone have a wonderful day.